Go ahead and let us know.
All right, if we're ready to get started, let's go ahead and go. All right, I'd like to go ahead and call the stationary committee meeting to order.
We have more seats for folks. More seats over
I
there.
see we have a large crowd there in CC8, but let's go ahead and get started so we can get through these items. Our first item is our status report on the efforts to reduce permanent backlog. Lackey, I see you're on that. Are you ready to go?
I am, Mr. Chairman. So good morning, Mr.
Right.
Chairman and members of the committee. For the last two and a half weeks, which frankly translate to my first two and a half weeks in the job, I've been spending all my days and almost the vast majority of my hours picking my stats brains as well as the brains of our fellow customers in trying to figure out ways to debuckle and debottleneck our permitting problem. You all, Mr. Nastri has already shared with you the agent report a couple of weeks ago. So you know that we have a daunting task ahead of us with 7,300 pending applications. So we are in the process of putting an action plan together to aggressively tackle that problem. And as we do this, basically our goal is to address the backlog problem as expeditiously as possible, improve transparency, improve customer service. And we want to do these while we are keeping the environment whole, and we want to accomplish this also in a sustainable manner, and we don't want to solve the problem and just watch grow back up again a few months later. So the challenge is enormous, 7,300 pending applications. Please keep in mind, in the last fiscal year, we processed 7,700 of those applications. So if we have a magic wand and we want to solve this problem, we have to enhance our permit production capacity by more than 100%. So the plan that we are putting together attempts to tackle this problem twofold: increase the permit processing capacity and improve efficiency through permit streamlining and other efforts to expedite the permit processing. On the efficiency, on the permit improvement processing capacity, we are going to be needing a lot more eyes, a lot more brains, a lot more hands to work on this problem. Certainly through more active, more closer management and supervision, we'll try to optimize our permit processing capacity. But in addition to this, one thing that became abundantly clear to us is we have been nurturing pretty hefty vacancy rates over the last several years that has contributed greatly to our dilemma here. So first and foremost, we'll try to, and we already started doing this, filling out those vacancies, both at the line engineer level as well as the senior and the supervisory level. The second one is we are certainly going to be needing more hours dedicated to, and FTEs dedicated to this issue. So we plan to ask our staff to work longer hours, perhaps during the weekends, first through voluntary measures, and perhaps if necessary through mandatory measures. And we know that even that is not going to be enough. So we are going to be looking at our other sister organizations here in the agency to see whether we can borrow engineers from them who have some permit processing experience and deploy them as well. If necessary, we'll be planning to go out and hire on a temporary basis and hire engineers, and if necessary, also hire those on a permanent basis. So all those are going to be part of the menu of options that we are compiling. On the efficiency improvement side, in addition to the more active management, we want to make sure that we better coordinate our work with other offices here in the agency. For instance, often when we process permits, some of them are subject to CEQA, modeling analysis, review of source testing reports, that are functions typically accomplished by other offices. So better coordination will help us trim down the time necessary to process those applications. We have a two-step permit processing process. First, we issue a permit to construct before the the equipment gets constructed or installed. Once it does get installed, we inspect, and then we offer the permit to operate. We intend to utilize our inspectors and go out and inspect the facility rather than our engineers so that they can stay on their desks and continue processing permits. Also, while this two-step approach is necessary for the more sophisticated, more complex type of equipment and processes, we are exploring the option to perhaps collapse those two steps into one for the cookie cutter type of instruments and simplify the process a little bit. Next one is automation, automation, automation. We want to develop templates, spreadsheets, standardized permits that are easy to fill, easy to process, web-based tools, online tools where the engineer will basically have to insert a few parameters and the computer program will spit out the permit a few minutes later. And we've started doing this with the boilers, and we want to expand this to other equipment to the extent we can. Next one is we have been experimenting with registrations and filing concepts. These are almost, for lack of a better term, over-the-counter permits. They're very easy to fill. They're one-pager or two-pagers, and you can basically get your permit or your filing in a day or two. We've experimented with this in area sources, and we think we can add additional equipment into that type of application. Not all our equipment that we are permitting are going to be conducive to transfer into that kind of system, but we want to explore those options and see to what extent we can debottleneck the process. Improved training is something that we want to invest. It's an investment for the future that will pay great dividends for both our new engineers as well as our current engineers. Certainly, we want to take a look at our policy development and perhaps streamline the implementation of certain policy of ours to the extent we can. And if we can, perhaps if we are constrained statutorily, perhaps recommend proposals to go back to the state, to the legislature, and see whether we can solicit their help to bottleneck our issues here. And certainly, we have made the commitment. It was a suggestion even from our permit streamlining subcommittee members that we met with a couple of weeks ago, to also look at other agencies like the Bay Area, like the Central Valley and Texas, and we are committed to do that. So in the spirit of transparency, we certainly have shared with you the agent report, and we're trying to develop some visual tools that perhaps we can display those online. So we are going to share with you one concept that we have that we can deploy fairly expeditiously. And you see that on your screen. Basically, we are trying to use a few colors, the green color, yellow, orange, and red, to basically telegraph to the public and whoever else is interested about the agent status of our entire pending permits. Again, I want to reiterate, this is the numbers are not real, but it's the concept that we are trying to present, and we hope that we can update this on a monthly basis. And we hope at the end of the day, a few months down the road, we'll be able not only to reduce the pending backlog, the height of the column, but also the agent permits quite significantly. We also plan to, and we are working on expanding this concept and developing something similar on a per equipment, per applicant basis. So if you are an applicant and you are interested in finding out where your permit is at any given time in the process, you should be able to get online, type in your application number or your ID number, and you'll be able to see where you are in the process. So this is just an example, and as I said, we'll be ready to deploy this in the next few weeks. So this is in a nutshell the various ideas that we are contemplating with. It's going to be The action plan that we're putting together is going to be a dynamic document, and we are totally expecting that as we identify new measures, we'll keep adding those into the plan. As we identify certain measures not working so great, we'll probably either modify those or remove them, replace them with others. And we think addressing this problem expeditiously makes great sense, great economic sense, not just for the business community. It makes great environmental sense because we want to make sure the instruments or equipment installed do comply with our rules and regulations, but also makes great economic sense for us, for the agency, because once an application is filed and the check is being received, we don't cash that check. We set it aside in an escrow account, and we don't cash it up until and after we issue the permit. So if we have permits that take years to process, essentially that money is sitting in the bank, eroding by inflation, and hence accelerating and expediting this permitting process will bring in great dividends to us as well. And I'll stop there.
I would just add that we are looking for a comment on the conceptual design, so certainly your thoughts with regards to that are greatly appreciated.
Everybody's speechless.
All right. Is there any other comments from the committee members?
Yes, if I could. I know when it comes to the permitting process that it's a lot of back and forth, right? So there's a certain amount of this that falls within the it's not our fault category.
Yes.
If there's some way, and I know that even when it's not our fault, sometimes we could force it to move along.
Yes.
But if there's some way to distinguish qualitatively between the type of backlog that we have, not just the pure
Yes.
numbers, but also the kind of where in the process it is. I'm sure you think of that, right? Yeah.
Oh, of course. In fact, I've already spent an enormous number of hours
Trying to
actually
figure out, yeah.
looking at it. Actually, we've started producing numbers, and I'll be communicating those. We'll be sharing those with you, and you'll see them. They are going to be part of the plan because we are looking at it not just from the aging perspective. That's just one variable, but there are a lot of more different angles that you can look at the issue, and it's quite revealing.
Yeah.
And certainly not every single pending application has been created equal. And different applications come with different level of urgency. So it will be smart for us to look at those pressure points and act accordingly.
And it also gives you tips as to efficiency in terms of,
Right.
of ways to
I just mentioned as part of my verbal comments, there are certain applications, for instance, that necessitate CEQA, modeling, source testing. Well, it's virtually impossible to process those in 180 days because, as we know, those takes months, sometimes years to develop. We treat them all as part of the backlog, but in an ideal world, we would like to create a separate hopper. We don't even have the means right now because our accounting system is sort of crude. We cannot distinguish between those two, but as we move to the future and as we get more sophisticated with our accounting and tracking system, we'd like to track those a little bit separately, still put them out in the public domain so that people know, understand what's happening with those permits, but certainly treating them all the same, we are not doing ourselves any justice.
Good question, good comments, and I'm glad to hear we'll be treating those differently, or at least showing that at some point. And I understand the technical hurdles. I think we still are lacking in that technical ability to get a lot of the information we need and make it easily accessible, not only to us, but the public. And I believe there's talk of this going into a public portal or a portal, maybe just for the board member, but somewhere we can see this on a daily basis, and that's going to be a huge improvement from where we've been.
Right.
We can all sort of keep track of this.
Mr.
Any other
Chairman,
board member questions?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to
Go ahead,
note
Wayne.
that there are members of the public that wanted to speak to this issue.
Sure. We'll go ahead and take public comment at this time.
Good morning. You warmed it up for me.
I warmed that for you.
Thank you. Rita Loof with Radtech International. And As somebody who's participated in the permit streamlining task force for many years, and frankly, have not seen many fruits come from that process, I'm encouraged to see that this process is being undertaken. And I'm encouraged by Wayne's leadership and open-mindedness of addressing this issue. I've long said that the best way to streamline a permit is not to require one in the first place. And I'm also encouraged that we are going to be looking at Rule 219 in August. I think there's going to be a public workshop because this committee gave very strong direction to staff on looking at that rule for UV and EV materials specifically. And that process has been 2 years in the making. So I'm glad that it's finally looking like it's going to come to fruition. Dr. Liu mentioned the other day at Home Rule Advisory Committee about win-win strategies and about looking at ways that we can partner with industry in achieving common goals, because there is a synergy, and especially with our industry, which is an environmentally friendly industry that can bring jobs to this area without sacrificing air quality. And so I definitely think there's an opportunity there. And in order for us to join hands, the fists have to be unclenched. And what we've seen in the past is sort of an adversarial relationship between the district and the regulated community. And obviously, in industry and in business, nobody likes to be regulated. But wherever there's an opportunity to partner, and I'm seeing that now with the vision of incentives that are being put forth in the AQMP. And I think I would encourage you to follow that, and I think that's the right way to go, and we're certainly willing partners. And for the permit backlog specifically, very simple concept. If you reduce your inflow, even though, if you reduce that, even if you're not increasing your outflow, you're going to have a decrease. And that's the theory. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita.
We have some more
Next.
public comment.
Good morning, Kurt Coleman, Southern California Air Quality Alliance. I told Lockie I would come here today. We had a meeting earlier this week on a permitting issue, and Dr. Liu stole my thunder and my idea, but so I support his recommendations. I want to say,
Don't feel bad, he does that to all of us.
really
Or at least we all
appreciate.
like to claim that we did.
I appreciate the direction this is going. As you know, for years, I come before the board during budget time and say we need to make permit streamlining and expeditious processing a priority, and it's heartening to see that it's being done. I do think sometimes just looking at the raw numbers, as Dr. Liu said, gives us, and Dr. Tesopoulos said, gives the staff a raw deal, because there are sometimes reasons things are held up for more than 6 months, and SQL was one of them. And so I think it would be helpful to be able to have a more fine-grained approach to where permits are and why, if it's beyond 6 months, if there's a valid reason, that should be made apparent in the reports. But I just want to say I'm very supportive of this and very appreciative, and we'll do anything we can do to help out on this. Be glad to assist. Thank you.
Good morning, David Rothbard, representing the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works, and appreciate the effort. Echo Kurt's statements. Very encouraging to see this as being a higher priority and move things along to be more efficient. Just something I've already conveyed to staff, and just wanted to say it again, is at least on my side of the table getting permits, the folks I represent, the common feedback we get that's time consuming, that I assume it's on both sides of the table as far as what takes a lot of time, is it's more of a, lack of better terms, an adversarial system that you go in and you negotiate your permit, where a lot of things should be standardized. Where there's a lot of permit conditions, you know what BACT is, you know what the standards are. If we have something, before you even ask for a permit, you know what the requirements are, there shouldn't be that haggling. And that's what we feel on our side of the table is, it seems like, well, someone had agreed to a certain condition because they're in a rush. and then staff's like, well, this person agreed to it, so you need to agree to it. Well, you know, depending on what's going on, maybe it's something you can't live with. And that becomes a very time-consuming process as far as butting heads, rather than something that's known up front what you have to do. So just wanted to convey that, and again, want to be appreciative of the process, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is that it?
That's it on this issue.
You guys are about a millimeter tall on my screen, so it's hard to tell. All right. Any other board member comments? All right, hearing none. That was just an informational item, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll move on to the item number 2, status report on regulation 13, new source review. We got William Thompson here.
Yes,
Yes.
present.
All right, go ahead.
Good morning, Chairman Benoit and committee members. After that exciting presentation, this one is a little less exciting. This presentation is for the 2014 New Source Review Final Determination of Equivalency. The purpose of this report is to show that and demonstrate that AQMD's NSR program is equivalent to federal NSR with respect to offset requirements for major sources. We present these twice a year. The first one in February is a preliminary determination, and the second one in September is a final determination. Just to give you a little bit of the history, we've been actually producing these reports since 1990. Around 2002, 2004, we entered into discussions with EPA, and EPA requested that we actually adopt a rule to memorialize our equivalency demonstrations, and that rule is 1315. We adopted that in 2006 and 2007, and then we finally adopted a revised rule in February of 2011. And it was approved into the SIP and became effective on June 25th, 2012. Okay, Rule 1315 establishes a procedure to demonstrate equivalency with the federal NSR offset requirements. It tracks debits from and credits to AQMD's federal internal offset accounts for each pollutant. We do an annual preliminary determination of equivalency, and we also do a final determination of equivalency and some projections into the future. For us to be in compliance, the balance of credits must remain positive. We also have a new requirement, somewhat new anyway, for CEQA, in that the cumulative net emission increases must remain below Rule 1315G thresholds. And here's the data in tabular form, and it's just important to note that the final ending balance is positive, which indicates that we are and remain in federal equivalency for offsets. Now this table shows the cumulative net emission increase, which is CEQA related for minor and major sources, and again it's important to note that the cumulative net emission increase is less than the thresholds in 1315G, meaning that we don't have to invoke any of the backstop provisions. Now we get to the projections, which are into the future. This is the 2015 projection, and once again it's important to note that the projected ending balance is positive, so we are projected to remain in equivalency. And it's the same for 2016. So basically, this is a projection of the future that we have nothing to worry about on this front. Here's a graph of the results showing that VOC is completely in the clear while the rest of the pollutants are stable. Okay, the conclusions of the program are that the final demonstration of equivalency for calendar year 2014 shows that the AQMD's NSR program continues to exceed federal NSR offset requirements for major sources. And for calendar years 2015 and 2016, we're projected to remain in at least equivalency. And additionally, we're in compliance with CEQA in that the cumulative net emission increase for calendar year 2014 remained below the thresholds. And I just want to mention that the next preliminary demonstration for calendar year 2015 will be presented to the governing board in February of 2017. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any board member questions? Any public comment? All right, you were correct. We were all very excited to hear that.
Yes, I suspected as much.
All right, we'll move on to the next item, setting a public hearing for the 2016, or October 7th of 2016 to amend Regulation 9 and standards of performance for new stationary sources in Regulation 10. Philip Fine. Philip, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. We'll bring up the presentation. This is a relatively routine item we bring to the board every year or so to update our Regulation 9 and 10 to be consistent and incorporate federal stationary source actions known as new source performance standards and the NESHAPs. So these EPA actions are final actions, and they're already in effect in our area. We already need to enforce those, and they're in effect across the country. But we try to put them in Regulations 9 and 10, so our regulated community has kind of a one-stop shop for all the rules and regulations for which they are subject to. And the enforcement of these regulations have been delegated to us in most cases by EPA. This year, there's a few more. So the new source performance standards are part of Code of Federal Regulations 40, Part 60. It's for new or modified or reconstructed sources of air pollution. There's 3 new standards that were promulgated over the past year or so, and then 5 amended standards. Just very quickly, these are the 3 new ones. The first one deals with methane limitations for gas well completions, natural gas processing, as well as VOC standards for oil and natural gas sources like oil wells and pumps. And note that we have source-specific rules as well that often go beyond some of these national standards. There's other ones for residential hydronic heaters, which is not enforced air furnaces as well. And this is from last Friday when we sent out the package. We did find one more NSPS we wanted to update in this amendment. So this subpart TTTT is for greenhouse gas standards for electric steam generating units and stationary combustion turbines, which is for power plants, and it's kind of one of the facets of that clean power plan you've heard about at the federal level. So again, we're just incorporating these into our Reg 9 and 10. And then these are the standards for which there were amendments, not necessarily major amendments, and these are the 5 areas. I do have details if anyone is interested. Sorry, and then for Reg 10, there are no new NESHAPs that we're trying to incorporate. So new and existing source. These are for hazardous air pollutants or air toxics. So there's been no actions to amend these existing standards, so we will not be bringing these forward. Now there are a couple of differences to what the package that went out Friday I just wanted to highlight in terms of the presentation, and we'll be updating the synopsis for the board. Again, I mentioned the NSPS for the utility steam generating units and combustion turbines. And then we did have proposed a couple actions on the NESHAPs, but we, after looking into it more, it's not really required to incorporate because these are already under Title V and Reclaim incorporated in that way. So those are differences to the summary sheet, and we'll be, hopefully with your permission, making those amendments to the synopsis going forward. And that's it. So the schedule is to set hearing in September and then board consideration in October.
Great. Any board member comments?
I have one. Subpart
Go ahead, Dr. Luke.
Subpart OOOOA, other than being the fundamentals of probably a very good doo-wop song, has to do with gas and oil wells. Now, yesterday, the Air Resources Board adopted a gas and oil regulation. We've got, what, 1142, right? Isn't our
48.
1148. Can't keep them all straight. Any incompatibilities with any of this, with what we're doing, what ARB's doing, what the federal government's doing?
We're working very closely with ARB on their oil and gas rule to make sure that there is no overlap for what we already have. And as you know, we're working on some amendments of our own. So we are trying to find the areas where we can complement each other and not have conflicting regulations. And in the same way, CARB was working very closely with EPA when they're considering their rule, because this had already was on track for being adopted last month. So from our perspective, it all is all fitting together. There are no conflicting regulations, and they are complementing each other.
Okay, we're going to hold you to that.
I would just add that we're also working with CAPCO, and I know Jill's been working closely with CAPCO on the oil and gas aspect as well.
Because it's a sort of a new area for a lot of air quality regulators,
Right.
and I could see everyone jumping in and stepping all over each other. As long as we can avoid that happening, I think we'll be good, right?
That's our intent.
Also, clarification, the ARB, it was a two-step hearing, and they're still working on their oil and gas regulation. It's coming back to them final sometime early next year. This is what I'm, so there's still time to work out.
I heard it was
any
going
potential
to, I forget what it was, well, maybe Judy can help with this, but it was going to Office of Administrative Law being finalized. I'm not sure if there's still changes that could be made.
Changes can be made.
Okay.
Councilmember.
All right, very good. Any other board member comments?
I didn't see that.
issues.
Any public comment? Okay, not hearing anything, I guess we'll move on to the next item. Regulation 20, reclaim. Go ahead, Phil.
Yes, this is not a routine item, as you can imagine. Back in December, when the governing board adopted the amendments to Reg 20 reclaim with the 12 ton per day shave, the adoption resolution did not include a proposal that dealt with facility and equipment shutdowns. So there was a language in the board adopted motion to return to the NOx Reclaim Working Group to conduct further discussion and analysis regarding what happens to NOx RTCs when a facility shuts down. The direction was to include in our proposal potential implications on the NOx Reclaim program of a proposal to perhaps limit the RTCs that become available during a shutdown, and also to consider possible alternatives that would allow a closer alignment of how we treat shutdown credits within the reclaim program and how we treat the emission reduction credits that occur outside of the reclaim program under command and control. Again, short of full forfeiture. So following this process, we're bringing, the motion said following this public process that we should either bring our original proposal back to the board or some other alternative back to the governing board for consideration. So this is the first time we've briefed the committee, and this is our preliminary proposal that staff has come up with after working with the working group. It is not the staff's original proposal. It is an alternative that we've developed working with the working group. So again, we've had 3 meetings with the working group, as well as several individual meetings with reclaim facilities. And we have received these 4 comment letters, as you can see here, over the past several months. And we have taken into account a lot of the comments we've received, both verbally and in these written comments. And we think we've developed a kind of a compromise proposal that achieves the objectives, but also retains some flexibility for the facilities. So again, the primary objectives of this was to avoid the use of facility shutdown RTCs that could become available in the market, and perhaps lower RTC prices to the extent that it would delay the installation of BART equivalent controls at other reclaim facilities, but also to achieve a closer alignment of how we treat shutdown credits under reclaim and how we treat ERCs under command and control, again, according to the board resolution. we wanted to further ensure that the reclaim program will, as required by state law, result in equivalent or greater reductions in emissions compared to BARC regulations. And when you think about shutdown credits, what we're really talking about is in between a full BARC analysis that we bring to the board for potential RTC reductions over time, you could have these shutdowns. And again, as we had said before, as actually occurred in that last interim period between 2005 and 2015, we had one large facility shut down, and that provided a lot of credits to the market and perhaps delayed some of the controls that we had anticipated to be cost effective. So, but we also want to provide fair treatment of facilities with equipment that is not operating, but not necessarily shut down, because it's not permanently shut down. It may be coming back online, and they would need those credits going forward. And that is something we actually tried to deal with in the last amendments. We got a lot of industry comments. Obviously, one of them was reclaim is working. You don't have to do anything with the shutdown credits. Everything's fine. It's buying and selling RTCs, no matter how they're generated, are fundamental to the program. And there shouldn't be any restriction on shutdown credits. So obviously we got those comments. Then we got some more specific comments that instead of focusing on individual equipment shutdowns, why can't you focus on the entire facility shutting down, which in fact was the issue that we had over that past 10-year period with one very large facility shutting down. And as staff was developing language last year, and even over the last few months, we came to the conclusion that it's very difficult to properly define this equipment shutdown. It was not very easy. So as we'll show in a little bit, we're focusing more on total facility shutdowns. We did get comments that are focusing on the use of the shutdown credits rather than the generation. Can you restrict the purchase or the use of RTCs for compliance if they derived from a shutdown facility? Maybe make these unavailable for use at a facility unless it's at BARC. If it's not at BARC, you couldn't use these credits. And so these are some very good comments, and we have been considering them very carefully, and there's some good concepts here. Currently, we don't have within the RTC market, we don't label the RTCs. They're not serialized, so we don't necessarily currently have a way to track RTCs through multiple trades to determine whether it's a shutdown credit or some other type of credit. So we like these concepts, and it's something we'd like to work on longer term. Again, as part of the AQMP reclaim measure. As you'll see, our proposal doesn't include this concept in draft form, but again, we'll be taking more comments over the next month or so to see if there's a way we can incorporate this again. And then we got the comment from at least a couple facilities or owners of multiple facilities. We treat multiple facilities under common control as a single facility. And we think we've addressed that to some extent. So, so this is essentially the proposal. It's applicable to facilities in the reclaim that are permanently shut down, not a temporary shutdown, but a permanent shutdown. Now that could be determined through surrendering their operating permits or coming in and just telling us they plan to shut down. But we also have a procedure that if they haven't done that proactively, that the executive officer does have some authority to determine a facility is shut down with some caveats and criteria which we'll go into. The other applicability is that, as you'll see later, we're focusing on the credits that were originally allocated and subsequently shaved. So these were essentially the more or less free credits that were given out at the beginning of the program. And these are the ones we may want to adjust upon a facility shutdown, not the ones that perhaps a structured buyer who came into the program later purchased for compliance, or even a longer-term reclaim facility, but has also gone out and had to purchase credit. So we're really focusing on those relatively free allocations that were given at the beginning and subsequently shaved. So again, if you don't have that initial allocation, this would not apply to you. So back in determining a shutdown, again, a facility could come in and let us know. But if the executive officer sees, based on their emission reporting, that their emissions have more or less dropped by 90% or more over a couple-year period, that's a good indication that the facility is close to or has shut down. So once that is determined, the executive officer can consider several criteria, whether that was due to some cyclical operation in conjunction with the equipment, whether that reduction came because of availability of parts to either upgrade equipment or to install pollution control equipment, whether there's some reserve status that's needed because of maybe some fluctuations in the market or recommissioning could happen, or that emission reductions were because you actually put on controls and got that 90%. That would obviously not be a reason to consider it a shutdown. If the executive officer makes that determination, the facility would be notified and they would be given an opportunity to request essentially a planned non-operational status, just like you have when you get your car registration and you could give it that status with the DMV. We'd give them no longer than 5 years, but you'd have to lay out meeting those same criteria why you deserve that non-operational status for 5 years, meeting that criteria. If based on that request, that planned non-operational status plan, then your RTCs for that period would become non-tradable. You couldn't sell them, but you would be able to keep them in anticipation of coming back online. And this would provide fair treatment of facilities with operations out of service, but not permanently shut down. And this, because it's a plan, would be appealable to the hearing board. So it's not just executive officer determining it. I mean, he would make that initial determination, but if there was a disagreement over the approval of this non-operation plan, then the hearing board can consider that. So once you've determined a facility is shut down, a total facility shut down, we want to calculate how we adjust their credits. So essentially what we've come up with is a way that is closer to how things are treated under command and control. It can't be exactly, because the way that ERCs work and the way that RTC works are fundamentally different, but we tried to align them as much as possible. So essentially what we would do is look over the last 5 compliance years prior to your shutdown and take the 2 highest years and calculate what your actual emissions were. And then we would calculate what your emissions would have been if you were at the BART level. Under command and control, you have what's known as a backed discount. It's the differential between your actual emissions and where you would have been at backed over the last 2 years. In this case, since it's not a new source or backed, and since we have very well-defined BART levels within the Reg 20 itself, it's much easier to use the BART level within the rule. So that we would take that delta, that BART adjustment, and then we'd also consider some of the Rule 1304 offsets that were provided initially as well, and also and subtract that from that amount. And then we would take that delta and apply it, that discount, and apply it to their adjusted allocations. So these are the original allocations that have been shaved over time, now 3 times. There was initial shave and then 2 more over time. So there is this allocation that each facility does have, and going forward, and each year is different based on the shave. So we'll take that BART discount and we will apply it to that amount, but no more than essentially eliminating that initial allocation. If they have purchased credits over time, they'll be able to keep those credits, but the credits that were given essentially for free at the beginning of the program will be subject to this BART discount. So again, this says that it can't exceed that initial allocation. You'd be going negative. However, if you don't have that allocation anymore, that theoretical value that you were given, then you'll be responsible to go out and make up the difference. And again, the requirements will not apply to facilities that shut down and transfer RTCs to another facility under common ownership, as long as it's the same function. So this would apply to a power plant, for instance, that would want to move capacity from one area to another area. It's for the same NAICS code, a National North American Industrial Classification Code. So that would allow maybe some efficiencies to occur. And again, we have other mechanisms through CEQA and permitting to make sure that there's no local emission impact. That's allowed now that they can shift the RTCs. We don't want to hold up projects that might actually lead to overall emission reductions and efficiencies just by shifting production in that way. But it would have to be the same NAICS 6-digit code at this point. For CEQA, in terms of these amendments, we did analyze in the past CEQA document last year pretty much the environmental impacts of putting on all the BART controls that were analyzed. So this proposal doesn't necessarily go beyond that. It may limit RTCs in the market to some extent, but it's not going to cause more than those total BART controls going on. So we've definitely bracketed the impact of this proposed amendment within that CEQA document, which is why we're doing an addendum to that past CEQA document. There's no requirement to circulate that. We will be circulating that at least 30 days prior to the public hearing. So the next steps is, again, we'll continue to have working groups. We've scheduled a public workshop, and we want to set hearing in September, public hearing in October, anticipating based on the interest in this amendment. We'll probably be back at Stationary Source in September to give the board an update of where we are in terms of the comments received and any changes before we go to October. Happy to answer any questions.
Any board member questions?
I just need to make sure I understand it. So this might take a while. What you're saying you're going to do is take the initial allocation, do a bark shave to that initial allocation, and leave the remaining allocated credits in the system?
No more, not the allocated credits. It's, you take that facility and see what remains of their initial allocation. Because again, we've shaved it 3 times based on bark shaves.
Right.
So whatever remains of that initial allocation, that'll be subject to surrender to the district based on that calculation.
So that initial allocation will come out of the market?
It'll come out of the market, not to be returned.
Okay.
So if you have, if your bark shave is greater than that, is greater than what that initial allocation is, because your actual emissions were actually higher because we had bought credits, we won't go below that. But if you had sold off that initial allocation, you no longer hold that going forward in infinite year blocks, then you'll be responsible to make up the difference.
And your anticipation then is that if it's going to take us 5, 7, 10 years to do another shave, this will not result in excess credits being in the market because we have removed all of the credits that were allocated to that facility that still exist.
I think, I can't say that 100%, because there are some facilities that, you know, have bought credits and then we will retain those credits. And if a facility shuts down and there's actual credits being used to offset emissions there, we'll be partially reducing that to the extent that they had an initial allocation partially covering those emissions. But the credits that they had went out and bought will not necessarily be taken from the market. And one of the bigger issues that we did hear is from the facilities is they definitely wanted to maintain flexibility within their facility to move the credits around within the facility. And then from one, which you may hear from today, that actually owns 4 facilities, they would like to move it around amongst 4 facilities, even though the NAICS code is different. We're not proposing that today, but obviously we're going to be considering those comments very carefully.
Okay, so the problem that we were trying to address has been that in this interim period between shaves, facilities have shut down, and the credits that were associated with that facility, be they allocations or what they had purchased or everything else, were allowed to stay in the market and making it easier to not have to retrofit equipment. Sounds to me, I'd like to know what the number is of credits that still stay in the market based off this formula versus maybe looking retrospectively versus what had been proposed initially, because if that's a big number, this isn't going to get anything done.
I think
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the facility. So for the Cal Portland case, which was the big case, they essentially, most of that was an initial allocation. I think they purchased a little bit and maybe sold a little bit over time, but my understanding is most of it was an initial allocation. So this provision, even with their bark discount, and they'd retain a little bit of that, would have substantially reduced that about 2 tons a day that were put in the market. Now going forward, there's many different cases. One may be a facility that's already spent the money to put on the barked controls, and then that differential would be very low or 0, and then there wouldn't be any removal of those credits. Another case would be where they have a very small initial allocation, but their emissions are higher and they've gone out and purchased that. The most we would be proposing to take away was, again, the credits we had given them for free. And again, there's a lot of different ways to do this, to define what the baseline is and define what the subtraction is. This was probably the most straightforward we came up with, but there's a lot of, we may get a lot of comments on other ways to do this going forward.
Yeah, my concern, of course, is that we don't end up where we were last time. And I'm not sure how this proposal can give me confidence one way or the other, because you have to have a crystal ball and know what type of facility will be shutting down, which I don't think we can anticipate.
And with the NOx Reclaim Working Group and within the AQMP, there's larger discussions obviously going on about the future of the reclaim program.
Yeah, you came up with a 5-ton shave somewhere.
Well, even beyond that, as to whether the NOx Reclaim program is providing the benefits even to industry that we're
Right. Yeah,
from,
I do think we have to have that conversation, perhaps not now, because I have plans this afternoon.
You and I both.
But I think that is. I mean, we have to have some serious conversations as, you know, the cap and trade program as initially conceptualized is coming to the end of its natural life, and how we transition to something different needs to be on the table, I think.
So we intend for those conversations to begin soon.
Okay, but we do have a real issue before us right now, and that is not to allow what has happened in the past to happen again. If you could provide me some crystal ball projections on how it's likely to, you know, the different pathways, just talking about what would happen if it goes this way or this way or this way in terms of shutdowns in the future, and what that would mean in terms of, you know, how many excess credits are in the system beyond BART, then it would be really good to know.
We can, we'll provide that in a revision of the staff report that was also released this week. I think we can focus almost without naming facilities. We know what the larger facilities are, and we can see where the situations are and what we think would occur in the future. I do want to mention that we did release draft rule language to the working group on Friday of last week, and we discovered an error yesterday. So we sent out a new version of the draft rule language last night. But the presentation that everyone received had the correct concepts in it.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead and take public comment at this time. I'm sure we have a few. Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Noel Moico with SoCal Gas. First and foremost, I'd just like to applaud the district staff for being open-minded, being very gracious with their time, and speaking with industry and hearing about our concerns on reclaim. So I have a few comments, reading this optimistically, and I think it's more for the spirit of clarity and transparency as opposed to anything else. The shutdown provisions, I subpart 5, where you talk about permit holders shall purchase and retire sufficient RTCs, similar to what Dr. Liu was sort of alluding to. Did you intend to have a number there as opposed to keeping it broad and open? Because I think what the message here in this read seems like it gives the impression to a potential shutdown to never sell their RTCs, because they don't know what time horizon they need to go back and make up for that deficiency or make up for that obligation. So that's one. You don't have to answer it right now. And two, and you touched off on this, I-6 talks about common ownership, and we're concerned about that. Obviously, we are the 4 facilities under the shutdown provisions. We also have 2 additional facilities in reclaim that are smaller. We're used to using the standard industrial classification code, and I can tell you, unlike the NATS, if we're talking about specifics, the SIC, we have different SICs already, even though we are a utility and a natural gas company. So we need to make sure that that's clearly understood. If common ownership, the concept of common ownership is to allow free flow of RTCs and shutdown credits, then I think that needs to be clarified. And last, I think we talked about the impact of shutdown credits to the entire reclaim industry. I thought there was going to be some kind of an analysis that's going to be done. If that has been completed or if that is developing, I would suggest and recommend that you share that with us, hopefully prior to the next public workshop, so we can give input on that.
I can address some of those, I think, pretty directly. So the way definitely if there's going to be some kind of requirement for a facility to go out and repurchase RTCs essentially to make up for some obligation to surrender to us. And again, this is only if you've ended up with, we would only take away your initial allocation, but if you don't have enough there, you've already sold off that initial allocation, then that would require you going out and purchasing. We want to get that up front in a rule so everyone realizes that, so people can plan for that. Number two, if you're at BART, if you have invested in BART under this provision, then your delta is going to be very small, if any. It might be zero. You wouldn't have any obligation. So that's one thing to consider, whether you need to sell off or not sell off, right? So you do have, the facility would have some options there. We just want to make sure it's clear so they can do their own calculations and accounting. In terms of common ownership, actually, I don't think you were the one we were talking about for the port facilities, but we're open to some suggestions there. We settled on 6-digit NAICS code for a reason. We thought 4 digits may not be enough, but we're open to other ideas or other definitions about. One thing we wanted to avoid is that one facility goes out and purchases an unrelated facility just to get right before they shut down in order to get the credits under common control and then use them to avoid potential controls at their own facility. So that's a loophole that we thought the NAICS code kind of avoided, but there might be other ways to do that, so comments are appreciated. And what was the last one?
The analysis of the impact.
So the staff report as of now has a very brief discussion of that, the idea being that as you have a shutdown, the demand for RTCs are being reduced at the same rate that the supply of RTCs. So we don't see that as a huge impact on the market. We already allow for growth. And again, the proposal is we're not even taking away all of them. We're only taking away the portion that was initially allocated. So in some sense, we would put it in there, but if people want to see more detailed analysis, and we're obviously willing to do that.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Joe Hauer. I'm with Ramble and Byron. I'm representing Gerdau's, Tamco Steel Mill, and Rancho Cucamonga today. I would echo Mr. Moiko's comments. I think the staff has worked hard trying to craft something that will work and be responsive to the governing board's direction. I do think there's some issues, and I guess one of which on my list was the NAICS code issue. I haven't done the research, but I suspect that if you were to look today, you would be hard pressed to find any 2 facilities under common ownership that have the same 6-digit NAICS code. It's probably a null set. And as Mr. Moiko pointed out, they have facilities that do similar things and they still have different codes. And so I really think I was going to propose 2-digit codes, but certainly 4 digits would be a lot better and allow highly related facilities to move credits between them as they do today all the time. And I have several other clients, Tamco happens not to be one of them, that have multiple facilities that, one, they all make industrial gases, but one makes hydrogen and one makes oxygen. They really are pretty related, but have different codes. So, also not sure how the provision in I-2 would work. That's the one that says that any 1304 offsets would be deducted. The implication, just reading it on its face, is that if you got the equivalent of 2,000 pounds a year of credits back in 1980 or something, that would be deducted here. I would think that it would only be the BART adjusted value of that, because it's been, whatever benefit was gotten has also been BART adjusted by now. And the rule's just not very clear on exactly how that would be done, and I hadn't realized the staff report out. I will try and find that and look at it, but I would think it would be incredibly helpful to everybody to have some examples, whether they're from real facilities or just some made-up examples, but to help people understand what the intent is. And I also think that, for example, in I-2, we need some clarification about what's intended, because I could see it many different ways. I also think that the provision in I-7 by giving the executive officer the authority to deem a facility shut down ought to be just removed in its entirety. There's certainly nothing outside the recurring program that does that. And until a company really decides to shut down, that ought to be the decision. In addition, the way it's written now, a facility that has changed processes or done other things that may go beyond BART to reduce their emissions would potentially be subject to having them confiscated as a result. There is an exception if you put on tail-on control equipment, but if you changed your process or did something else, now you're going to be punished for it. That's exactly the kind of behavior we want, and that you would expect a company to be able to generate revenue from having done that. And right now it looks to me that the opposite would happen, especially if they made a big change. So, and I guess if this provision is going to be in there, then I would think the facility ought to have the option, if they're deemed to be shut down, they ought to at least be released from all the other reclaim requirements that go with it if they're having their credits confiscated. So those are my comments.
Thank you. I think on that one issue where we included that criteria for putting on controls, I think that's a good suggestion, at least to also consider other types of process changes that led to emissions. I think that's a good suggestion. And I was just corrected, the staff report I think is going to be released today. All right.
Okay, great. So I didn't miss it. Thank you very much. Yes,
sir. Kurt Coleman, Southern California Air Quality Alliance. We appreciate the work the staff's been doing on this. Unfortunately, I can't say yay or nay today. We're having our monthly meeting on Monday, and we will be discussing this. So once I get some input from my members, we will get some feedback to you. But look forward to working with you to put this to bed. Thanks.
Morning, Sue Gordon from Westbeth. So I would also like to thank staff for working with us on these provisions. We do hope that some of what you have in the staff report addresses the concerns. As some of the requirements, as everyone has been saying, have restrictions on the RTC trading, and we're hoping that the impact to the market and to the program and participants, if you go into that a little bit more as was requested in resolution. And the most prohibitive one that we're looking at is the common ownership with the SIC code, so hopefully you'll be able to work on that. But I think where we are today, looks like we should be able to get something going and get this done by October, kind of put this away and move on, I think. So thanks a lot, Phil, for working with us, and see you at the next work group.
Any other comment? No other comment, Mr. Chair.
No other comments?
No.
Okay. Any other board member comments, questions?
Mr. Chairman, I would just say that to thank staff for working on this. I think they have you can see that they've really dug down deep to formulate a proposal that is fair, and that they've gotten a lot of input from industry. And I can see they will continue to work with industry to refine this even more as needed. But I think it is a good solution to the shutdown issue that we've been grappling with for the last few years. So I want to thank staff and as well as industry leaders who have helped with this. Thank you.
Agreed. Very good comment. All right. Anybody else? If not, we'll move on to the next item. All right, we'll move on to proposed rules amended 307.1, 1401, 1402, public notification for procedures for facilities under air toxics. Susan, I see you jumped up there. Let's go ahead.
Okay. So by way of background, in June last year, the board had adopted amendments to Rule 1402 to incorporate the revised OEHA guidance. And with that, in the adoption resolution, the board had directed staff to work with stakeholders to look at ways to incentivize early reductions in Rule 1402, and also to explore alternatives to public notification. So staff did return back to the Stationary Source Committee in fall, and with recommendations to proceed with rulemaking. So staff has been working on proposed amended Rule 1402, which is the core rule. Rule 307.1 has the fees that are associated with Rule 1402. And we have amendments also proposed for 1401 for consistency with what we're doing in 1402. We've been working with a working group with stakeholders. We've had 3 working group meetings. We're having a 4th working group meeting next week. We've received 4 comment letters, 2 from SEEB, 2 from WISPA. We've been providing weekly briefings to the environmental groups, and we have a public workshop. Now it's not tentatively. It is now scheduled for August 10th. So I wanted to provide a little background on Rule 1402. Rule 1402 was adopted over 20 years ago. It implements the AB 2588, the Hotspots program. In general, the program has about 400 facilities that we're tracking. The facilities are divided into 4 groups. Every 4th year, the facilities are required to submit a detailed inventory. We prioritize those detailed inventories and ask the facilities that are the high priority facilities to submit an air toxics inventory report and a health risk assessment. Based on that, we approve the health risk assessment, and based on the approval of the health risk assessment, we have different risk levels that the facility would have to do certain things. So if they're above the notification risk level, which is essentially a cancer risk of over 10 in a million, the facility would then be subject to public notification requirements, which would include public meetings and then written notifications to homeowners and businesses surrounding the facility. If they're above the action risk level, which is a cancer risk over 25 in a million, and also a cancer burden of 0.5, which looks at the isoplex within 1 in a million and the number of cancer cases within that population that's over 0.5, they would then be subject to risk reduction measures in addition to the public notification. And then we have the last risk level, which is the significant risk level, which is 100 in a million. And the additional requirement for that is that facilities would then be subject to public meetings until they're under the significance threshold. Just a quick overview of the proposed amendments. We're not proposing any changes to these 20-year-old thresholds, health risk thresholds. We want to maintain these protective risk thresholds. The primary amendment is to incorporate the voluntary risk reduction program. It's an alternative pathway that will result in more reductions sooner. We also have a variety of elements that we want to do to Rule 1402 to streamline and to incorporate practices that are currently being implemented today into Rule 1402. And then there's some obsolete provisions. The rule's 20 years old. There's things that have gone in past, and also we want to take the opportunity to update the public notification procedures, include the voluntary risk reduction modified public notification in the updated procedures. So the voluntary risk reduction program, the overall concept and the eligibility of the program is that facilities that have a previously approved HRA, and as that HRA is approved, Provided they're below the action risk level, the 25 and a million, they would be eligible to participate. We would also look at these facilities to ensure that there any recent emissions data, monitored data, that these facilities are not above the significant threshold, which is the 100 and a million. Facilities that elect to participate are committing to reduce below the notification level 10 and a million. That's about 60% below the regulatory requirement of 25 and a million. These facilities would then be required to submit a voluntary risk reduction plan. The plan would include the risk reduction measures to get them below 10 and a million. Upon approval of that, they would be required to implement it. We would then verify implementation based on the measures that they implement. And then the South Coast SCAQMD would then conduct the modified public notification. Modified public notification would not require any individual letters or public meetings. We'd post this on our website, included in our AB 25 annual report. The modified public notification, we have a sample letter in the notification guidelines, would have background information about the voluntary program, about the revised OEHAL guidance, would identify the facilities that are participating in the program, and that would be published in the annual report. So in terms of the voluntary risk reduction program, there are safeguards that are built into this. In terms of how we would, the plan itself, they would have to provide the same detail that they would through the traditional program. They would provide the equipment and process information as they would in an air toxics inventory report. They would use the same computer model to estimate the health risk. If the facility fails to submit the voluntary risk reduction plan, we give them 2 opportunities to submit it. And if we can't approve it, then they're put back into the traditional program on an expedited schedule. They'd have to submit the air toxics inventory report, health risk assessment within 90 days. So we are also including provisions for what we're referring to as potentially high risk level facilities. And really this is to kind of codify provisions that we're currently implementing in practice. We've had facilities in the recent past where they're high risk facilities, facilities that are exceeding the significance threshold. And what we want to do is we want these facilities to submit their air toxics inventory report, their health risk assessment, their risk reduction plan simultaneously. We're also incorporating a provision that would require these facilities right off the bat to submit an early action risk reduction plan. We know these facilities are high risk. We're concerned about these facilities. We don't want to delay any early actions that we can implement. Through the working group process, we've received comments regarding having a process in the determination for these potentially high-risk facilities. So we've incorporated a process that incorporates an opportunity for the facility to provide input before we make that determination of a facility being potentially high risk. This is just a quick summary of the schedule. This slide was modified from the packet that was distributed early. All I added in there was just the little green, the green box to separate the air toxics inventory report and the risk reduction plan. But even with the revised traditional risk reduction, it's 8 months faster. We were able to take a little bit of time off on the submittal, the air toxics inventory report, and the health risk assessment. We're also taking time off in terms of the risk reduction implementation. Instead of 3 years, it'll be 2.5 years, and it'll be 2.5 years from the approval of the plan, not the submittal of the plan. Another comment that we had worked with the stakeholders. In regards to the voluntary risk reduction plan, they're going to be getting reductions that are going to be deeper than what would be required in the traditional program. They're going to go to 25 instead of, 10 in a million instead of 25 in a million. And then when you look at the overall process, it's about 2 years faster than the traditional program. For potentially high-risk facilities, what will happen for them is that although at the end of the process it's also faster, but I know it's really hard to see, but the little lighter boxes there are the early action risk reduction measures that we would be working with the facility immediately right off the bat to abate any high-risk situations. So the proposed amendment includes a number of other provisions. We're streamlining elements that are in Rule 1402. We're reducing the submittal times for the health risk assessment and the risk reduction plans. We're creating a 2-step process for submitting the inventory and the health risk assessment. And what this will do is it'll eliminate any unnecessary health risk assessments. Now what we want to do is we want to look at the inventory that they submit. If there's not a need to submit the health risk assessment, this will save money and time for the facilities. We'll save resources for the agency, as well as OEHA as they review those if they don't need to submit the health risk assessment. We also are proposing amendments to 1401 consistent with what we want to propose for 1402 in terms of reporting to the board and providing analysis of new toxic air contaminants or revisions to health values of existing toxic air contaminants. The existing rules would require that we report to the board as OEHA does make these changes. Now, as the program is so much more mature, we feel like we can do this annually in the 2588 report. However, if there's ever a new toxic air contaminant or a change in a health risk value that we feel could be a substantial impact on permitting or 2588, we would include in the adoption resolution a commitment to come to the Stationary Source Committee to report those changes. And then we've also added into proposed rule, amended rule 1402, a process for facilities that would need to conduct a source test. We add the criteria for identifying when a source test would be needed and the time frame, the additional time a facility would be allowed if they need to do a source test. We want to incorporate this up front in the process instead of having a facility submit a health risk assessment, then at the end of the process finding out we need to delay because we need a source test. There's also provisions that we've implemented or incorporated for consistency between the traditional program, risk reduction, and the voluntary program. Both programs would be allowed 2.5 years from the time the risk reduction plan is submitted to implement those risk reductions. And then for both programs, we're going to have a one-time 2.5-year extension instead of unlimited time extensions for risk reduction plans. In the past, we've only had one facility that has requested a time extension, and we're revising the criteria for this time extensions. That would be essentially things that are out of their control. Clarifying, we're also including provisions just to clarify provisions, updating definitions, incorporating the fees that would be associated with voluntary program. We're also adding, incorporating a process for submittal and approval of the air toxics inventory report and also for approval of the health risk assessment. These are things that are currently being implemented that are not in the rule, so now it will be incorporated into the rule. We're also updating the public notification procedures. Currently, public meetings are conducted and the logistics are determined by the facility. SCAQMD staff will take control of that, so the guidelines will reflect that. The owner or operator will be required to either reimburse or pay directly for the venue, for audiovisual equipment, personnel, security, and other logistics. Also, we want to add a provision, or we are adding a provision that would require the owner or operator to be present at the public meeting. We feel that's critical in case there's comments or questions about the facility or directly to the facility. We're also adding requirements in terms of the modified public notice for the voluntary risk reduction program. Schedule is public workshop scheduled for August, additional working group meeting. We have one scheduled for next week. And if we have any new outstanding issues, we would come back to Stationary Source Committee, and we're scheduled for October. Any questions?
Any board member comments or questions? Any public comment?
I've got a question.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand the timelines. And I also want to make sure we're taking advantage of all the opportunities we have here. We're going to reduce the overall process by 8 months, no matter what.
Right.
This expedited process will be an additional 16 months faster, potentially, right?
It'll be the new voluntary will be about 2 years faster.
But when you subtract that 8 months, we're going to shave off anyway.
Okay, if you want
months.
to use that as the baseline.
So it still can take from the beginning till that time 3.5 years to get that risk reduction in place, which I think is a really long time. So sometimes it'll be easier or harder depending on the situation to get those risk reductions. It could be as simple as installing best management practices right? To reduce emissions from non-source emissions, you know, at a chrome plater. It also could be off-the-shelf technology, bolt-on stuff. You just go out, you buy it, you put it on, you're done. That can be done quickly. And perhaps there are also ways to provide further incentives to act faster than this, in terms of taking 2.5 years to actually get those risk reductions. What I'm concerned about is the 16 months that we're gaining is not necessarily as wonderful as I'd hoped, because it could still take 3.5 years. So I don't know, you know, what all the opportunities are, but I do think that we need to keep in mind that there are different situations for different facilities. Some may be actually capable of accelerating that voluntary risk reduction much more than the maximum time on it.
Yeah, and just to clarify, in this 2.5 years, this is the max that they would get. But
Right.
what we do is we look at the measures that they're going to implement in the schedule, and that's part of the approval. And so if it's if we feel they can do it in 1 year, then the approval would be based on 1 year.
Okay. Well, then how do we do that in a non-arbitrary way, I guess, is the question. I mean, we have to.
They provide the schedule to us, and then we look at the schedule for, you know, the reasonableness of the schedule. If someone's going to say that they're going to put on a filter, and the filter is going to take 2.5 years, and that's the only thing they're going to do,
Right.
then, you know, we would question that. So
About changing a compound to a less toxic.
Right.
That might be something.
that would be very
much
quick,
quick,
right? Yeah, like a material replacement.
Right.
Right.
The rule language now says something like as soon as possible.
Right.
I don't know exactly
Yeah,
what
it's
it is,
always
and we're
had
retaining
that.
And council's comfortable with as soon as possible as a.
Yeah, it's
That's
As soon as
enforceable.
Just an English version is expeditiously as possible.
Yeah.
And it is, our risk reduction plan approval is appealable to the hearing board, so if the facility really has evidence that they can't do it that fast, then they have that opportunity.
Okay. So, I mean, just as long as we get something real out of this, I can still think it's better than the somewhat outdated process that we operate under now. And I'm all for getting the actual emission reductions quickly instead of just going through a lot of paperwork. And so I understand that's what we're trying to avoid here.
Okay, any other questions? Any other public comment?
None.
All right. That was also an informational item. We have a couple of written reports attached. Any other business from the committee members or any questions on the written reports? Not hearing any general public comment? At any locations? All right, that will move to adjournment. We'll see everybody on September 16th. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Good weekend, Joe. This was actually our scan or our session of that.
That's good.
Was that, I had heard rumors
But I know they should be different.